A classroom full of students pretending nothing is wrong. Desks neatly arranged. Attendance called. Eyes avoiding one empty seat. The horror isn't the deaths. It's the agreement to behave normally while waiting to die. And inside that agreement, a fragile romance tries to exist, not as escape, as denial. This is a love story growing in a place where reality has already been voted out. The first thing Kouichi notices about the classroom is not hostility, it's choreography. Chairs scrape at the same volume, pages turn in synchronized softness. Voices never rise high enough to claim attention. The students move like they've rehearsed neutrality, every gesture measured, every expression diluted before it reaches the surface. Nothing is openly wrong, which is exactly what feels wrong. He enters as a transfer student, expecting awkward curiosity, the small social turbulence that accompanies any new arrival. Instead, he receives polite containment, smiles that end early, questions that never fully form. His introduction lands in the room and disappears without ripple. The class accepts him the way a body accepts a foreign object it cannot reject, by pretending it isn't there. This is not cruelty, it's maintenance. The horror of the classroom is administrative. Rules exist, invisible but absolute. Everyone follows them with the calm efficiency of people who believe deviation is dangerous. Kouichi can feel the pressure of those rules without hearing them spoken. Face, conversation, they compress silence. They turn ordinary school life into something airtight. No one explains anything. And the refusal to explain is heavier than any ghost story. He senses immediately that the class is protecting a lie, not aggressively but tenderly, like a fragile artifact that cannot survive exposure. Every student participates. Even the teacher speaks with careful neutrality, as if emotion itself might disturb the structure holding the room together. Kouichi doesn't feel fear yet. He feels excluded from a ritual he cannot see. An exclusion, when performed this gently, is more unsettling than open hostility. It suggests a consensus he cannot access, a history he is expected to obey without understanding. The classroom is not haunted by a presence. It is haunted by an agreement. And he has already broken it simply by arriving. He sees Misaki on the second day, not because she stands out, but because she doesn't. She sits near the window, posture relaxed, gaze unfocused in a way that suggests she is listening to a different frequency than the rest of the room. No one looks at her, not accidentally, not in passing. Their eyes slide around her with practiced precision, like water parting around a stone. She is physically present, socially erased. The effect is uncanny. Kouichi tests it at first, watching to see if someone will acknowledge her existence. No one does. When the teacher calls attendance, her name is omitted with the smoothness of habit. When papers are passed back, her desk is skipped without hesitation. The class is performing subtraction. And everyone agrees on the result. Kouichi doesn't fall in love, he feels relief. Relief is immediate and visceral. The tension he's been carrying since his arrival loosens the moment he understands he is not the only one who sees the distortion. Misaki is proof that the classroom's logic is not universal. She is a crack in the surface, a visible refusal. Their first conversation happens outside the hospital in the sterile quiet that follows visiting hours. It is not flirtation. It is diagnosis. They speak cautiously, circling the same observation from different angles. "You see it too," Kouichi says without saying it. Misaki doesn't nod. She doesn't need to. Her presence is the answer. There is intimacy in that recognition, not warmth, clarity. Two people confirming the world is misaligned in exactly the same way. It is the emotional equivalent of finding another person who speaks a language you thought you imagined. They do not exchange confessions. They exchange coordinates. And in doing so, they create a private map of reality. Because the classroom refuses truth, honesty becomes geographically specific. It exists only in the spaces where the class cannot supervise it. hospital corridors humming with fluorescent fatigue, stairwells that smell faintly of dust and echo. Empty hallways after school when the building exhales and pretends to sleep. These locations become their territory, not romantic hideaways. Observation posts. Their conversations remain subdued. They talk about what they see, what they suspect, what the others are pretending not to notice. The curse is not yet named, but its gravity is already shaping their language. Every sentence carries the weight of something unspeakable pressing against its edges. Love here is not passion. It is oxygen. The relief of speaking without editing. The quiet intoxication of being understood without performance. Kouichi does not feel swept away. He feels stabilized. Kouichi's presence aligns his perception with itself. Kouichi around her, he does not need to question his own sanity. This is attraction built on epistemology. They trust each other because they see the same thing. And in a world committed to denial, shared sight is more intimate than touch. Their proximity grows naturally. They walk together without announcing the decision. They sit close because distance feels artificial. There is no declaration marking the shift from alliance to affection. It happens the way breath happens, automatically, invisibly necessary. The class continues its choreography. The lie remains intact. But inside their small territory, reality is allowed to exist without disguise. And that permission feels like warmth. The first death interrupts routine with surgical cruelty. It does not announce itself as a supernatural event. It arrives disguised as accident, coincidence sharpened into inevitability. The aftermath is louder than the incident. Whispers multiply, faces pale. But even then, the classroom does not shatter. It tightens. Denial becomes more disciplined. Students smile harder. Teachers speak more gently. The ritual intensifies in response to pressure, like a structure reinforcing itself against a storm. Kouichi watches the class double down on the lie and understands something essential. The performance is not ignorance. It is defense. They believe acknowledging the horror will invite it closer. Silence is their shield. Misaki stands outside that shield with him. Each death draws them closer, not because tragedy is romantic, but because the world becomes less trustworthy by the day. Every time the class refuses to name what happened, Kouichi feels the ground tilt. Misaki is the only fixed point left. They talk more, walk longer, sit in silence without discomfort. Their bond thickens under pressure. Fear is admitted between them in ways it cannot be admitted anywhere else. "I'm scared," Kouichi says once, the words barely audible. Misaki does not soothe him. She says, "I know," and that acknowledgement is enough. Love forms here in opposition to collective madness. The more the classroom edits reality, the more fiercely they protect their shared version of it. Honesty becomes an act of loyalty. To lie would be to abandon each other. The curse escalates, routine fractures, and their intimacy becomes the only stable structure either of them trusts. There is a quiet horror embedded in this closeness. Their connection depends on the catastrophe surrounding them. Without the curse, they would be strangers orbiting separate concerns. It is fear that has aligned their trajectories, disaster that has synchronized their emotional clocks. Their intimacy feeds on crisis. Each new death reinforces the boundary between them and everyone else. The class becomes an external organism, distant, incomprehensible. Inside their private territory, the world simplifies. There is truth and there is denial. They choose truth. And choosing it together begins to feel like virtue. But virtue built on exclusion carries a shadow. They stop trying to convince anyone else, stop testing the classroom's logic. Engagement feels pointless compared to the clarity they share. The social world shrinks, their conversations replace it. Love narrows their focus, not violently, gently, until the rest of the class feels like background noise. Kouichi realizes one afternoon that he no longer expects acceptance from the room. He enters, takes his seat, and feels nothing when conversations avoid him. The ritual continues around him, precise and suffocating, but its power has weakened. He has chosen a different reality, Misaki's reality. Not because it is safer, it is demonstrably more dangerous, but because it is honest. The classroom's fiction now feels obscene, a performance that demands emotional participation in exchange for temporary comfort. He refuses. The decision is quiet. No announcement, no confrontation. He simply stops trying to rejoin the choreography. His attention migrates permanently toward the one person who will not pretend. Love becomes a private territory, a space where the curse is named, where fear is spoken, where perception does not need to apologize for itself. Inside that territory, Kouichi can breathe. Outside it, the air tastes filtered. And slowly, almost without noticing, he begins to treat the external world as disposable. The class can keep its lie. He has chosen the person who sees. And that choice feels like survival. The next death is not shocking. It's procedural. The class absorbs it the way an office absorbs a memo. Quickly, efficiently, with the minimum emotional footprint required to keep functioning. Chairs scrape. Attendance is taken. Someone's desk is empty and remains empty. No ceremony marks the subtraction, but something subtle has shifted. Fear is no longer vertical, directed at the curse, at the unseen architecture of fate pressing down on them. It has turned horizontal. Students stop scanning the ceiling. They start scanning each other. Eyes linger too long. Conversations halt mid-sentence when someone approaches. The politeness that once preserved the classroom now mutates into surveillance. Every interaction carries the implication of accusation. Who caused this? Who triggered it? Who failed to follow the rules closely enough? The curse stops being an external force, becomes a social weapon, and the classroom transforms into a courtroom without procedure. Verdicts forming silently, guilt assigned through glances. No one says the words aloud, but everyone understands the implication. If disaster can be traced to a person, then control can be restored. Blame is the illusion of agency. Kouichi feels the shift immediately. The air grows sharp. Students cluster in defensive constellations, alliances forming and dissolving based on proximity and rumor. He and Misaki are not invited into these constellations. They are already outside, which paradoxically stabilizes them. Exclusion simplifies loyalty. There is no temptation to defect because there is nowhere else to go. The class has rendered them a separate category, observers instead of participants. And in that separation, their bond stops being circumstantial, becomes structural. They are not just two people who see the truth. They are two people standing on the same side of a line. Investigation begins not as heroism, but as necessity. If the classroom is determined to cannibalize itself, Kouichi and Misaki will not survive by standing still. Information becomes their only currency. They start gathering it with the quiet urgency of people inventorying oxygen. The archive room smells like paper and neglect. Dust thickens the light. Old records sit in stacks that feel less like history and more like sediment, years compressed into brittle layers. Every document they touch carries the weight of repetition. The curse is not an anomaly, it is tradition. They listen to recordings of voices long dead describing the same patterns, the same denial, the same escalation, the same frantic search for a solution that always arrives too late. The past does not feel distant. It feels recursive, as if the classroom is trapped in a loop that periodically refreshes its victims. Research becomes their intimacy. They lean over the same desk, shoulders touching, breathing synchronized by concentration. Their conversations shrink to whispers, not out of fear of being overheard, but out of reverence for what they're uncovering. Each discovery is a confession the past is making directly to them. Trust deepens through verification. When Misaki interprets a fragment of evidence, Kouichi accepts it without negotiation. When Kouichi connects to dates, she follows the logic instantly. They are building a private language made of facts, a syntax of survival. This is not infatuation, it is partnership. Pressure forges precision. The more chaotic the classroom becomes, the more exact their communication grows. They stop repeating themselves, stop clarifying. Each understands the other at the speed of recognition. In a room full of people dissolving into paranoia, they become sharper together. The ethical problem arrives quietly. It does not present itself as a villain or a ritual circle drawn in chalk. It arrives as a conclusion that cannot be softened. Stopping the curse requires subtraction, a life exchanged for equilibrium. The mechanism is old, impersonal, terrifyingly efficient. Someone must be identified, someone must die. The discovery sits between them like a third presence. For a long moment, neither speaks. The archive room hums with the sound of distant electricity. Dust floats through the beam of a flickering light. Love intersects with arithmetic. They are no longer asking how to escape. They are asking what survival costs. Kouichi's first instinct is denial, not of the curse, but of the price. He searches the documents again, hunting for an alternative buried in a footnote. Misaki watches him with an expression that is not resignation, but clarity. "We knew it wouldn't be clean," she says. The sentence is gentle. It lands like a verdict. Their conversations change after that. They grow slower, heavier. Every word must pass through the filter of consequence before being spoken. They stop fantasizing about rescue. They start discussing thresholds, what they would accept, what they would refuse, what kind of people they are willing to become. Affection becomes the space where fear is admitted without disguise. "I don't want to choose," Kouichi says one night. The confession stripped to its skeleton, Misaki doesn't argue. Neither do I. The honesty binds tighter than reassurance would. They are not promising strength. They are promising witness. Whatever decision comes, it will not be faced alone. And that is the only comfort left that feels legitimate. The class notices their distance hardening into defiance. Rumors spread with mechanical efficiency. Kouichi and Misaki are labeled instigators, meddlers, threats to the fragile equilibrium. Students who once ignored them now watch openly. Teachers speak to them with rehearsed neutrality that barely conceals alarm. They have crossed from anomaly to liability. Neutrality is no longer available. By choosing truth, they have chosen a side. The classroom interprets investigation as aggression. Information is destabilizing. It threatens the ritual that has preserved the illusion of control. Isolation becomes a form of commitment. Every hostile glance is a reminder that returning to denial would be easier. They could rejoin the choreography, smile, pretend. Let the curse run its course without interference. But denial now feels more terrifying than death. They have seen the machinery. They know the cost of silence. To retreat would be to collaborate with a mechanism that is dismantling their classmates one by one. Love anchors them in that refusal. Their allegiance to each other becomes indistinguishable from their allegiance to reality. They walk through the halls side by side, not touching, but aligned. The distance between their shoulders is deliberate, close enough to signal unity, far enough to avoid spectacle. Their presence irritates the classroom like a splinter. They accept the irritation, because to surrender alignment would be to surrender the only thing that still feels solid. The curse escalates again, not just in body count, but in texture. Deaths grow stranger, more theatrical, as if the mechanism senses resistance and responds with emphasis. The classroom's paranoia peaks. Accusations flare openly now. Students shout, desks are overturned. The choreography collapses into improvisation. Trust evaporates. And trust is the substance their relationship depends on. Kouichi feels the pressure trying to infiltrate the space between him and Misaki. Fear whispers its favorite argument. If survival requires sacrifice, how long before the logic turns inward? How long before love is measured against necessity? They fight entropy on two fronts. Externally, against a system demanding blood. Internally, against the suspicion that proximity to death corrodes everything it touches. Their strategy is deliberate transparency. They say what they're afraid to think. They confess impulses before they harden into secrets. Every doubt is aired, examined, diffused. It is exhausting. It is essential. "I'm scared of what we'll do," Kouichi admits. Misaki meets his eyes. "So am I," she says. "That's why we say it out loud. Naming fear does not eliminate it. It prevents it from mutating in the dark." Their bond survives not because it is pure, but because it is ventilated. Nothing is allowed to stagnate. Love becomes maintenance, a constant negotiation against decay. When they finally reach the truth in full, it does not arrive as triumph. It arrives as clarity. The mechanism is mapped. The origin understood. The solution stripped of myth and reduced to action. There is no hidden mercy in the final equation, only precision. They stand on the roof of the school at dusk, the city stretched beneath them in indifferent geometry. The wind carries the faint sound of traffic, a reminder that the world continues, unaware of the calculus unfolding above it. Kouichi expects relief. What he feels instead is gravity. Clarity is heavier than confusion. It removes the protective fog of uncertainty. The path forward is visible now, and visibility eliminates excuses. They cannot pretend ignorance. They cannot postpone. Action is the only remaining language. He looks at Misaki and understands that love has brought them here. Not to safety, not to salvation, but to the edge of decision. Their connection has functioned as a compass, orienting them toward truth, even when truth narrowed their options. There is no space left for spectators. To step back would be to betray the alignment that defines them. To step forward is to accept that affection carries consequence, that choosing each other also means choosing the moral terrain their bond has revealed. The city lights flicker on one by one. The classroom waits below, trembling in its fragile ritual. Between them hangs a silence dense with implication. It is not empty. It is full of everything they know and everything they are about to become by acting on it. Love has stopped being comfort. It has become position. And positions, once taken, demand movement. The final escalation does not announce itself. There is no speech, no signal, no cinematic warning that the system has reached its breaking point. The classroom simply tips past equilibrium. The fragile choreography of rules collapses under its own weight, and what replaces it is not strategy. It is momentum. Students stop pretending they are managing the curse. They start running from it. Desks overturn, doors slam. The architecture of the room becomes an obstacle course, built from panic. Every face carries the same expression, not fear of death, but fear of being chosen by it next. The horror refuses elegance. Deaths arrive without punctuation. A body hits the floor mid-sentence. Scream cuts off as if edited. The randomness is the point. There is no moral geometry here, no poetic symmetry. The curse is not trying to teach, it is trying to finish. Kouichi moves through the chaos with Misaki beside him, and the absence of heroism is the first thing he understands. They are not protagonists in a narrative that will reward bravery. They are two people navigating a collapsing structure, trying to remain intact long enough to see its end. They do not charge forward, they observe. And observation in this moment is an act of resistance. Every instinct tells the class to look away, to reduce what's happening into noise, to blur the details into something survivable. Kouichi feels the same instinct rising in him. The mind reaches for anesthesia. But Misaki's hand closes around his wrist, not to pull him, but to anchor him. "Look," she says quietly. It is not a command, 'tis a pact. They keep their eyes open. They register each loss not as spectacle, but as fact. Names attached to bodies, memories attached to the names. The horror remains specific. And specificity prevents it from dissolving into abstraction. They are not stopping the disaster. they are refusing to let it become anonymous. The mechanism reaches its conclusion with the dull inevitability of machinery running out of fuel. The final confrontation is not a duel. It is an exhaustion point. The classroom is quieter than Kouichi imagined silence could be. Chairs remain where they were abandoned. Books lie open to pages that will never be turned. The geometry of normal life is intact, but the meaning has been evacuated. He walks between desks and feels the ghost of conversation hovering at shoulder height. Echoes of laughter that no longer have mouths to return to. Survival reveals itself as administrative. Attendance will be adjusted. Reports will be filed. It is measuring what remains. Love in this space is not touch. It is proximity without demand. They stand near each other and allow the absence to exist between them without rushing to fill it. That restraint is its own form of care. They are acknowledging that what happened cannot be metabolized instantly. It must be carried, and carrying requires patience. The refusal to look away does not end with the curse. It becomes their shared discipline. In the days that follow, the school resumes its routines with bureaucratic determination. Bells ring. Teachers speak in voices calibrated to suggest continuity. The institution performs normalcy because institutions survive by insisting on it. Kouichi and Misaki move through this restored structure like translators of a language no one else wants to hear. Every hallway contains overlays of memory. He remembers where someone stood laughing. She remembers the sound of footsteps that will not repeat. They do not correct the world's desire to forget. They correct their own. When conversation drifts toward simplification, when classmates who survived begin compressing events into digestible anecdotes, Kouichi feels the pull of relief. It would be easier to accept the edited version. Easier to let the horror shrink into something that fits inside a sentence. Misaki interrupts that drift with precision. "That's not what happened," she says softly, not confrontational. Exact. She restores the missing details, the hesitation, the fear. The human scale, Kouichi follows her lead. Together, they maintain a version of events that resists polish. Their loyalty is not to trauma, it is to accuracy. Love becomes the agreement to remember fully, not as punishment, as preservation. They understand that forgetting would be a second erasure, one performed voluntarily. The curse took bodies. Amnesia would take meaning. Their bond positions itself against that erosion. They become custodians of a history that does not want to survive. And in that custodianship, their connection deepens into something quieter than romance. It becomes witness. The relationship that emerges after catastrophe is stripped of illusion. They do not pretend to be unchanged. They do not aestheticize their survival into destiny. When they sit together now, conversation carries weight by default. Even trivial topics pass through an awareness of fragility. Every joke contains the knowledge that laughter is temporary and therefore precious. The romance is less performative, more adult. They no longer seek constant reassurance of closeness. They recognize it in the way their silences align, in the way each allows the other to inhabit grief without interruption. There is no urgency to fix what cannot be fixed. Recognition replaces intensity. They see each other as people shaped by the same fire. That shared shaping eliminates the need for explanation. Some memories cannot be translated to anyone else. With each other, translation is unnecessary. A glance is sufficient. This is not a return to innocence. It is a progression into awareness, and awareness stabilizes them. It provides a foundation that fantasy never could. They are not in love with an idea of each other. They are in love with the version that survived, scarred, observant, unwilling to simplify. They stay not because the horror bonded them romantically. They stay because they trust each other with the truth. And truth, once shared at that depth, is adhesive. The final resolution is not cathartic. It is durable. Life continues with the stubborn persistence of systems that outlive meaning. New students fill old desks. The architecture absorbs replacement bodies without resistance. To an outsider, the classroom is indistinguishable from any other. Kouichi and Misaki know better. They carry a parallel map of the space, one marked by absences invisible to everyone else. Walking through the room is an act of double vision. They see what is present and what is missing simultaneously. That perception does not fade. It integrates. Love survives as residue. Not a triumphant banner, a quiet constant. Proof that something human persisted inside a structure designed to erase humanity. Their bond is not a reward granted for endurance. It is a byproduct of having endured together without surrendering perception. They are not proud of what happened. They're responsible to it. And responsibility becomes the grammar of their relationship. They speak to each other in a language shaped by shared memory. Each conversation carries an undercurrent. We were there. We saw it. We are still here. That continuity is not celebratory. 'Tis steady. They do not escape untouched. They escape aware. And awareness becomes the axis around which their connection rotates. It prevents romantic inflation. It prevents denial. It keeps their affection grounded in the material of what they actually lived through. They hold truth together, quietly, not as a monument, as a practice. And in that practice lies the final transformation of love, not as escape from horror, not as cure, but as the decision to remain human in the presence of what tried to make humanity optional. The curse ends, its coast remains, so does the memory. And between them, memory is not a burden carried alone. It is a shared weight that proves neither of them vanished inside the event. Someone remembers, someone understands, someone refuses to reduce it. That refusal is their bond. Not innocence, not fantasy. It's truth held together and therefore survivable.